Hey everybody, I hope you're having a fantastic day. This is Rob. Welcome back to the channel. And today I want to discuss and break down the idea of two Nintendo Switch 2 models. So as most of us probably know, going back to at least the Xbox 360, it has been very common for some companies who release new hardware over the past 15, 20 or so years to release more than one model at the same time of their console or handheld or whatever new hardware they might be releasing, to give some kind of option to consumers. One is obviously going to be cheaper than the other, so maybe some folks can afford that one easier than the more expensive and premium model of this console or hardware. And it's been an interesting thing to see develop in the industry over the past, like I said, 15 or 20 years. I've never been the biggest fan of it personally, but I also understand why we've seen it happen the few times we have seen it. And of course, it's no surprise to anyone that that practice is still in place today because both Sony and Microsoft released their current-gen machines, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series consoles, with two different versions at two different prices. The PS4 had the digital-only version at $400, they had the disc version at $500, and the Xbox Series S was, I don't even know how much that thing was, $299? I think you can buy it for $300. And then, of course, the Xbox Series X is $500. I have the disc version of the PS5, and I have the Series X. Again, I don't really know much about the Series S. I haven't followed anything about what Microsoft does with that, other than I know that its lack of power compared to the Series X was proving a problem for porting Baldur's Gate 3, right? And eventually they figured that out. I don't know the fine details because I also don't follow that franchise, even though my wife loves it to pieces, and plenty of my best friends are big fans of it. I haven't followed or played Baldur's Gate, but I do remember that being kind of a big deal many, many months ago when they were trying to bring that game over to Xbox. The fact that the cheaper, less expensive, less powerful version of Microsoft's console was posing a problem. Now, regardless of your feelings on the concept of two different versions of consoles being released at one time, two different SKUs I would even say, we're also going to discuss the idea, naturally, of Nintendo's next console, the Switch 2 or the Super Switch or whatever it's going to be, and if Nintendo would be considering themselves doing the same thing by releasing two different versions of the Switch at different prices with different features. There was a rumored story back in October, like 4 months ago or so, about Nintendo maybe doing this. This story, or I should say this video, isn't really about that rumor, but it is just worth noting that that was a story going around back in October. I don't know if there was any traction to it. I more want to talk about this holistically as just a general concept or a business decision because I think that maybe Nintendo would consider doing it, and I want to discuss why I think it would be a bad idea. Naturally, before I jump any deeper into this, I just want to let you guys know that I'm trying to cross 25,000 subscribers, and I hope to do that sometime in the next couple of months. If this is your first video on the channel, then I hope you consider subscribing. Or if you've been watching for a while and not subscribed, then I hope this video convinces you to finally do so. Now, before we jump into the Switch 2 concept of two different models releasing, or even discuss that rumor that was happening back in October, we of course have to revisit the fact that Nintendo themselves has done this one time before, and it was their last generation console, the Wii U. I think that it's been so long, and it was sadly such an unsuccessful console, that I think a lot of people forget this in some of their conversations about Nintendo's past, or even the Wii U, but that also launched with two models. It is, to my memory, and I've been gaming since before the NES even released, to my memory, I think it's the only time Nintendo did release a home console, or maybe even a handheld, with two models on the same day that it actually launched. The Wii U very famously launched with the white 8GB Wii U version that was $299, and then there was the black kind of premium edition, and that was $350, and that had 32 gigs of storage. It's so crazy to think about because I very famously am a huge fan and defender of the Wii U, and I still play it regularly, as many of you guys know if you've been following me for a while. But I've never actually seen a white Wii U in the wild. Well, that's not true, except for the demo unit I played at a GameStop. Like, the day they were getting their demo unit, I remember driving to my local GameStop in my area, or at least the one that I knew was going to have a demo unit, I should say. And so I played that, like Rayman Legends, on a demo unit maybe 2 or 3 months before the Wii U released, you know, back in 2012. So that's the only thing I'll say, is I did play a white Wii U gamepad demo unit at a GameStop. But once it released and people had it, and for years we were playing and talking about Wii U games, I never saw an actual white Wii U in the wild, and you really never even see pictures or videos of them. They're always seen as the black premium edition that had the 32 gigs of storage. So it's really a great showcase to the fact that Nintendo, the one time they tried to do a split SKU release, clearly it didn't work much for them, because I don't think very many people bought that white 8 gig Wii U. And so let's move on to the Switch 2, Nintendo's next generation console that we all expect will be hopefully revealed and released this year in 2024. And why I think that doing 2 different SKUs at launch for a theoretical Switch 2 would probably be a mistake. Now, like I mentioned a few times already in this video, there was a story and a rumor going around back in October that somebody said, oh, there's going to be 2 different SKUs of the Switch 2 when it releases. One is going to be digital only and not backwards compatible. The other will be more expensive, and it will use cartridges, and it will be backwards compatible. So that was like the big difference that was going to, generate the difference in price. The cheaper one was all digital. It did not take cartridges. And the other version, the more expensive one, would take cartridges, and it would also offer backwards compatibility. Now, I don't think there was any validity to that. I'm not saying it's impossible for Nintendo to try the 2 SKU thing, because as I mentioned, it is still a popular thing that companies are doing today. But in general, I never really took much away from that, and that's one of the reasons I never talked about it back when it happened in October. Now, I'm only talking about this because as we get closer to what we hope will be the reveal of the Switch 2, I'm starting to think about all these different things about when they'll reveal it, how they'll reveal it, what will the system actually be and look like, how much will it cost, how am I going to find a way to pre-order it on time, all of these things. And it's just one of those concepts that popped back into my head that maybe Nintendo tries something crazy and they do 2 SKUs of the Switch 2, and it got me thinking about, again, why I think it just wouldn't be a great idea. Now, when I think about why I believe that 2 models of the Switch 2 would more than likely be a bad idea and maybe not successful, of course, I could always be wrong. That's how anyone who predicts things is. But the reason I feel pretty good saying it wouldn't be a good idea is because I think that notoriously, it almost always fails, and it always presents problems for companies who release more than one model, and there's always the ideal model that ends up succeeding, whereas the other one doesn't. I think that what we've learned in the past, there might be a few outliers, but I think the general lesson I want to feel like the game industry, these console manufacturers, and us the gamers have learned is that the cheaper one isn't going to sell as well and isn't going to be as popular, and sometimes could even hold back some games and releases and some of your business, as we've seen with the Series S, and people end up just gravitating towards the more premium version. I mean, one of the things that keeps the gaming industry so successful is that we as game fans and gamers and consumers, we're pretty willing to shell out a lot of money for the things that we want and believe in and want to support, And you could argue that that could be to the detriment to us, the consumer, because it sometimes sends the wrong lesson to the industry that they can milk us for money. But it is what it is. We're usually pretty willing to pay. And so whether you're talking about the disc PS5, the Xbox Series X, if you're talking about the premium edition of the Wii U, if you're talking about the larger storage version of the Xbox 360, it's almost always these premium versions that perform better, and that cheaper version that comes out at launch usually ends up getting forgotten, left by the wayside, and eventually no one really cares about it. Now keep in mind, I am still in general, an advocate for the consumer and for us, the game fan, and the people spending our hard-earned money to buy the things we want to enjoy as our hobby in the world of video games. So I'm not against the idea of making something affordable for people, because the economy sucks and the jobs situation sucks, especially here in the United States where I live. And so I'm all for people being able to afford the gaming that they want. And so on its surface, the idea of releasing a model of a new console like a Switch 2 that is cheaper and makes it easier for some folks to afford that, whereas they might not be able to afford the premium one, that is the thing that I do support, okay? So I'm not against that. I want all of you to be able to buy the Switch 2, and if a cheaper model makes it easier, then go for it. I support that 1,000%. But when I think about the end result and what we normally see happen, like I just talked about for the last couple of minutes, I don't think it's ever actually worthwhile for a company to spend money and research and development and time marketing and manufacturing these cheaper, less evolved versions of a console that, again, almost always end up being forgotten and doing nothing for the consumer. And I'll even, again, revisit the Xbox Series S situation and remind you that sometimes it could be an example of holding things back. We know that the Xbox Series S is kind of proving a problem for some games and some game developers to release on Xbox platforms. Baldur's Gate 3 is like one of the biggest games from last year. Maybe not the biggest selling, but it won Game of the Year. Everyone loves it. Like I said, I know plenty of people, including my wife, who play and absolutely adore that game. So it had so much attention, and the fact that you almost couldn't get that game of all games on your console because you made this silly, cheaper Xbox Series S digital-only console that wasn't as powerful and struggled to be able to run this game, you almost missed out on that game. The developer had to put in way extra time and manpower and money just to make it work. And so that's another reason why I don't know that it's worthwhile for Nintendo to consider doing the same thing with their Switch 2. In essence, what I think I'm trying to say is that I feel like there's a level of efficiency and perfection you get when you just focus your attention 100% on the right thing. I'm going to make a really weird analogy, but I think that we can make this analogy work for the gaming space and specifically for Nintendo and for the Switch 2. The analogy I'm making has to do with the show Shark Tank, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with Shark Tank, right? And I'm a huge fan of Shark Tank, and I don't really know why. I think I just enjoy the business conversations. I'm like mixed on capitalism, like as an actual like thing. There's things I like about it and things I don't like about it, but let's not get into that part of it. The point is, on Shark Tank, a lot of times people will come and they'll pitch their product and they'll pitch their business or whatever. And many times, even if their numbers are pretty decent in terms of sales and revenue, they might be a company that says, we have, this line of 7 different versions of our one product. And the sharks will ask them questions and they will learn of the 7 different versions of their product. One of those versions is selling 80% of all of their revenue. And the sharks will almost always drop out and not invest, but they will say, I'm not investing because you're too scattered, you have too many SKUs. You have one SKU doing 80% of your business, drop the other 6 and focus on that one, because that's your moneymaker, that's your brand, that's the thing making you successful. You're too scattered, you're wasting money on different SKUs and inventory for these other SKUs, and marketing all the different versions of your product is just holding your business and its revenue back. You would do better to focus all on your one money-making product. Now, I'm certainly not a business expert and a business professional. I'm definitely not an entrepreneur, and I sure as hell am not a millionaire like all of the sharks, or billionaires, right? Like the sharks on the show Shark Tank and whatnot. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm the be-all, know-all, and it might seem weird to just use a TV show like this as like a business example. But at the same time, the people on that show, all of the investors, like they know what they're talking about. And as somebody who does watch that show and I follow up on the companies too, and if they see success or not pretty often, that advice has proven to be pretty solid from what I've seen. It makes a lot of sense to me. And so if we take this weird Shark Tank analogy and now reapply it to Nintendo and the Switch 2, and even video game companies in general, I think that's part of the larger thesis I'm getting at here is I think that it's better to just focus on the one thing you want to do, focus on it 100%, make it the best version it can be, put all of your marketing behind it, and don't segregate your market with 2 different versions of your console because you're going to end up wasting money and time on the cheaper one that ends up, like I said, almost always falling to the wayside and being forgotten. And I think that if Nintendo did that with the Switch 2, more than likely, nothing is a sure thing, okay, but more than likely, that would probably happen with the cheaper version of the Switch 2 also. Really, the only last point and last quick discussion to have here before wrapping up this video is whether or not this is even a realistic scenario, right? I'm blabbing on about this whole thing here with all these companies and Nintendo and 2 SKUs at launch and all of that stuff and making Shark Tank comparisons. But there's also the reality here, and is Nintendo even considering 2 SKUs for the Switch 2? And again, I'm not really going to take that rumor or that story or what have you from October seriously. So I'm not even going to consider that. I'm just going to talk about it from a fan perspective who follows Nintendo in this industry. Do I believe Nintendo would do it? And I'll be honest with you guys. Kind of, yeah. I think there is a chance Nintendo would be considering it. And again, I'm not basing that on anything. This is just a fan just guessing. So don't run with this as like a rumor or anything. But if I was to just think about the current state of the market, the landscape of the industry, what Nintendo may or may not be considering doing, the fact that they tried it with the Wii U once, and the fact that Sony and Microsoft themselves did it with their current generation, yeah, I think there's a chance that Nintendo might be considering it. I mean, here's the thing. Nintendo already iterates on their hardware anyway. They've only done it ever once at launch with the Wii U, but when you look at all of the versions of the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance and the Switches and the DSs, like, they always do eventually release new versions of their consoles and their handhelds. So what's to stop them from, again, trying to just get ahead of the game and release multiple versions at launch? I think there's a chance. I'm not like betting on it. I probably slightly lean towards thinking it's just going to be one SKU for the Switch 2. But I'm just going to be honest with you guys. And even after the whole rant that I've had in this video about why I think it's a mistake and it's failed for companies in the past, I'm not putting it past Nintendo to consider trying it. So maybe I'm like, what? I'll say 65-35, right? In favor of one SKU for the Switch 2. 65% of me feels like we're going to get one Switch 2 at launch. The other 35%, which is not insignificant, I'm kind of feeling like maybe they will do a two multi-SKU launch for the Switch 2 or something. So basically it's like a third. Like, 2/3 of me says they won't do it, 1/3 says they might. And so again, 1/3 is pretty significant because Nintendo is in an interesting state. We've all had these conversations and thought about it. And even Nintendo has mentioned it a little bit in some investors' meetings in the past. They're in a pretty unique scenario. And they're in a very precious scenario because they have to treat this transition to the next console very smartly. They need to do it properly. Is backwards compatibility a good or a bad thing? How much power do they need to put into it? Is it still going to be a hybrid, or are they going to ditch that entirely? Is it going to allow for your Nintendo IDs to transfer over? They basically confirmed that is their plan, so I guess that has been answered, but you know what I mean? Like, they need to be very smart with this, so maybe they're having those discussions. Is it smarter to do two SKUs, or is it smarter to do one? And I know that I personally feel, as a fan, not as a business person, but as a fan, I feel one SKU is smarter, but they might feel differently. Nintendo could be considering so many different things to make sure they don't drop the ball with the Switch 2, that maybe this is one of the things they do. And last point to end this video, even though I spent a lot of time in this video telling you why I don't think it's a good idea, there's always the chance that if they do it, maybe it does work, and maybe it is successful, and maybe Nintendo cracks the code, so to speak, and they do find a way to launch two SKUs with the new console generation and make them both extremely successful, and maybe it only helps their business and it doesn't hurt it. I don't know that. I don't know which way it's going to go. I don't know what they're going to do. But at this point, I think you've heard my feelings, and hopefully I've given you a lot to think about yourself and form your own opinions on. So that's what I think about this. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Again, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time on another video. Bye-bye.